Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out to come out and do this. I know this is probably not what you want to be doing. You'd rather be out enjoying this gorgeous weather. But for those of you that might be new to Central Florida, I'm going to tell you from now until about February, this is why we live in Florida. It's going to look like this for the most of the time. So you've got plenty of days to go out there and enjoy yourselves. It is going to be a informal lecture. Yes, I've got the old-fashioned PowerPoint going, but that's just to help me keep on track. If at any point you want to have a question, you have some other comment, please feel free to pipe up and we'll talk. I will have some time at the end that you guys can ask me questions, and we can, troubleshoot some things that you may be directly dealing with, and see if I can offer at least 2 pennies worth of advice on that, and then we can talk a little bit further beyond that if you need to. But generally we're talking about trying to control and understand what stress is. What does it look like? Where does it all come from? Are they internal, external causes of these things? It's everywhere, right? In that sense, it comes from all kinds of different angles and perspectives. We're going to take a look at some of the mind-body connections. And when we talk about what that means, is that there is a lot of proof, and you guys have probably been privy to it as well, that what we think and what we say directly has impact on how we feel and how we behave. So that those things like inner voices, our personal experiences on where things are, and how you cope with it, and being able to understand some of the strategies on what you need to do. Recognizing that stress ultimately isn't the enemy, right? So, what is stress? Stress, according to some dictionaries, is a force or influence that requires an adjustment or change or some other response, right? When there's a stress that's placed, it's requiring us to do something differently. And so it presses, it pulls, it forces our body in some way, shape, or form to do something. It's asking us to do something differently. It says that it can be a deformation that's actually causing in our body. Guess what? Stress and anxiety can actually do that. It can actually create disease states, and as it says, it may be a factor in actually creating disease causation, right? So the stress can be physical, mental, emotional, any of those things to impact the way we think and the way we feel. Where is it? Well, I mentioned it a few seconds ago. Stress is everywhere, in all shapes, sizes, and impacts. Everyone has it. Everyone experiences it. And I'm coming back to that in what that means, but statistics show that 25% of adolescents between ages of 13 and 18 actually have an anxiety disorder, right? 25%. So 1 out of 4 kids between the ages of 13 and 18 actually have an anxiety disorder. 6% of those are severe anxiety, debilitating, to the point where they are unable to just be able to get through daily life, right? So we're needing intervention, possibly medications to do some of the things that it turns the volume on some of that stress down, so that they can actually work on some of the behavioral changes that need to happen. Guess what? 83% of adolescents say the school is their biggest stressor. I would think that most of you in this room would agree on that same thing. 69% getting into a good college. Well, for you guys, you already got into a great college, so you're in a great college. But that doesn't mean that stress goes away, and in fact, it continues to remain in place because you are now challenged to perform and stay in sync with a lot of other folks that are also coming into a great college. You've got financial concerns, whether it's for yourselves or for your parents, right? What are kids today feeling? Well, 35% of them say they are laying awake at night, insomnia, not able to sleep because they're worried, they're thinking. 26% overeat in an attempt to try and comfort some of that anxiety. And then you have the other side, which is 23%, they skip meals. They're not actually providing your body the calories and the energy to be able to handle and deal with things. Both of those things are actually very dangerous. Overeating can make you feel sluggish and guilty and frustrated. Not eating enough can again do the same thing, make you feel sluggish and not feel like you're actually firing on all cylinders. How many of you heard the word hangry, right? When you get angry, you can feel, when you get hungry, you can feel moods of anger and fatigue. You may snap at your friends and your classmates. 51% of kids say they actually say something to someone, which actually leaves 49% of the population that says they actually don't say a word to anybody. Right? Which means that they're just kind of keeping it all stuffed inside. All right, what are some of our sources or triggers of stress? Physical, noise, cold, clutter. How many of you get stressed out when there's a cluttered room or a cluttered desk and you just can't get your head straight, right? That's a level of anxiety. That's a source of anxiety. It's a trigger. It sends us into a state of discomfort that says something's got to give and I've got to fix this, right? Now, the opposite of it is there, which you end up saying, all right, I'm going to just spend my time cleaning and not actually taking care of the things that you need to take care of, which ends up adding to that sense of frustration because now you're procrastinating. Right? Social issues and triggers, romantic relationships, right? In these years between now and your 30s, finding a mate and finding a partner, these are the things that you're all struggling with, in addition to just being able to have just regular friendships and maintain school grades and think about what your future is going to look like, right? So these are all the places where, from a social standpoint, things get into our way. Institutional regulations. You've got requirements that you've got to follow, fulfill. Honors college, university, your major, your double major, your minor, your internship. All these things are pressure that comes down, creating that anxiety and that stressor. All right, major life events, starting at college. How many of you are freshmen here? Okay, so how many of you are local that raised your hand that are freshmen? Okay, and out of state or out of town? Okay, so whether it's local or out of state, obviously when you're coming from somewhere else, having to adjust to a brand new environment is very hard. For those of you that are local, did you find it super easy to adjust to UCF and the whole college, or was it still hard?
No, it's still hard.
Still hard, right? Because it's a whole nother set of rules and environment, engaging in people that come with different backgrounds and different expectations. And you're starting from scratch. Whether you went to the same high school or same school from pre-K all the way through or high school, you came from those places, you had a foundation. Here you're starting with nothing. And that can stress you out as well. One thing that I want to kind of quickly go back to is that some of this impact, and what we will talk about, is that it actually can last for a good amount of time, potentially up to years. Some of the negative impacts of some of the things that you're dealing with. So it's super important to be able to understand and recognize what is actually happening to you. Right? So the reason I go through all of this is so that you can start being able to say, oh yeah, I had this event happen, or this circumstance is occurring at this point, and that's probably causing something to happen in me, and I need to be able to start looking within myself, going inside to try and find out what is actually happening. Is this normal? Is this norm for me, or is this out of the norm for me? And then being able to do something about it. All right, those are all the outside stressors. Internal stuff, right? What do we do to ourselves? Our own lifestyle choices. Do we have healthy habits? Are we exercising? Are we eating well? Are we drinking a lot of caffeine? Right? Which I think comes with being part of college. But the problem with that is that it has its own domino effect of having negative effects in your sleep, your appetite, and so the next thing you know, caffeine's keeping you awake, but you're awake in a not productive way. Right? Drugs, tobacco, all those things in terms of what you're doing for your body. Overscheduling. How many of you are overscheduled, do you think? Mm-hmm. Right? It's become sort of the norm to feel like if we're not doing something at every minute of every day, there's something wrong with us, right? And we have accepted that overscheduling is normal. It's not overscheduling, it's normal scheduling. And in fact, every minute of every day being scheduled is actually not normal, and it's not healthy at all. So being able to recognize that and taking that step back doesn't mean that you have to cut something out. It means you have to put something in to help center yourself again and figure out where those stress points are actually affecting you. All right, financial, social isolation is another big one. You would think in a campus of 68,000 students, you wouldn't feel isolated, but I can guarantee you there are a ton of kids in this campus that feel isolated, that feel alone, that feel like they have no place in particular that they belong, and so they sort of withdraw and they don't say anything. Remember what I said earlier, 49% of kids don't actually say they're struggling with something. They just keep it bottled up, right? So, and then the opposite, obviously, over-involvement, when we talked about the scheduling. Negative self-talk. How many of you engage in some of this stuff? The blaming, the I'm not good enough, and I'm not smart enough, and this didn't work, and over-analyzing situations. Right? We all get into those circumstances, and at the moment, if we're doing it for just a moment to help us figure out what went wrong, okay, I'm going to put together a strategy to figure out what goes right. Okay, fine. But when it becomes a chronic tendency to kind of go and constantly say, I'm not enough, it's not working, right? That becomes something that you need to kind of take a look at. Interpretation of events. This is a huge part of cognitive behavioral psychology. Right? Things can happen in the world out here, and for you, they may have zero impact. It doesn't even register on your radar. But for you, it may mean the difference between having a great day and having your day destroyed. Right? It all comes down to how we are actually interpreting that event and what's happening with us. When we are able to turn some of our own internal language, remember I talked about our internal voices, our inner voices, when we're able to kind of turn some of those internal language around to start being able to say, okay, this happened out here, how I'm going to take it and what I'm going to do with it is up to me and my control. You start being able to separate that what happens out here and how it happens to me is one transaction. You start to separate them into two transactions. One that's out here and one that creates my ability to react to it, respond to it. One of the things when it comes to internal stressors is what's called a mind trap, right? I mentioned two words just now, react and respond, right? And I use this very loosely, but if someone were to say to you, they're having a reaction to a medication, does that automatically make you feel like it's a good thing or not a good thing? Not a good thing, right? Typically when someone says they're having a reaction to a medication, typically right away we're saying, oh, okay, there's an allergic reaction, they're not responding, it's not well. But if somebody came up to you and said, oh yeah, medicine went on and they're responding to the medication, what does that imply? Things are moving in the right direction, right? So one of the traps that we need to be careful of is being able to recognize the difference. Am I reacting? Am I responding? Is this a reaction? Is this a response? Reaction implies an involuntary act that just simply occurs as a result of something else happening. A response implies some level of participation on your part to say, I'm actually going to respond to what's happening out there, right? So being able to kind of thinking about it from your own standpoint to say, okay, did I react to this circumstance or this situation or this event, or did I actually choose a response that I would want to have? And then kind of checking where things go with you. Having rigid beliefs, right? I must, I can't, negative, self-limiting, all of these things. Stress-prone personalities, right? Most of you that are in the Honors College are here because you are type A personalities. How many know what that means? Right, a little bit. Driven, goal-oriented, leaders, need things done, very organized, controlled, right? Control freaks. So there's that other end of the spectrum, and then there's the end that still works for you. When we start to go too far to the dysfunctional end of that same spectrum, right, it starts to not work for us. We can be type A personalities. We can be any of those personalities. We can be obsessive compulsive. We can be, narcissistic. We can be any of those personality traits. The difference becomes when we are cross that boundary. Personality traits function on a spectrum. So if we are on this side of the spectrum, on the healthy side, those personality traits actually work for us, right? Being a little bit narcissistic is okay. You've got to be able to have that self-confidence and have that self-esteem to be able to push and fight for the things that you feel like you deserve. Being overly narcissistic and deciding you are God's gift to this earth may not work for you, right? It may isolate you. It may push you away in the wrong direction. It might not get you the tools that you need. Right? So it's all on a spectrum. So again, being able to take a look at what are your personality traits. Where are they? Are they pushing you to the other end of that spectrum? And do we need to figure out how to get you back over to this side of that functional line? What does stress look like? This is what it looks like. Headaches, dizziness, clenching in the jaw. A lot of folks grind their teeth at night to wear a mouth guard. My husband's a cardiologist. His largest growing population of patients is the under 40. Under 40. As a cardiologist, 15 years ago, our average age was probably 65 to 70. Our average age of our patient population now is dropping closer to the lower 50s. Right? Why? They're experiencing chest pain and palpitations and shortness of breath. They are so stress prone and stressed out that they're having to actually come in for cardiology evaluation because they're convinced that that there's something wrong with their hearts, right? Well, it doesn't help that when in evaluation they're drinking 2, 3 Red Bulls or Monsters or whatever it is to try and get them through the day. But the reality is that we are actually creating physical symptoms as a result of the stress and anxiety that we're experiencing. So if you're experiencing these things, that should be a red flag. That should be something that says, hey, I need to pay attention. I need to kind of think about where things are. And I mentioned the word red flag. So in my work with folks, what I try to give is an image of like a ski slope. right? Have any of you been skiing before or no? Watch skiing, right? You see those flags that are on there. They have to kind of go through and whatever, right? So imagine yourself going through and life is okay. And you need to be able to start listing a set of experiences and feelings that say, green flag, everything's good. When I'm feeling calm, I'm sleeping well, I'm eating well, these are all signs of green flag stuff, right? Everything's going in the right direction. All right, what's next? Yellow, maybe, yellow flag, all right? Some of these things, maybe some of the headaches, maybe just, you know, your stomach's a little upset, you skipped a meal because you don't feel like eating, right? Some of those things should be maybe a yellow flag, all right? All right, let's move that down a little bit further, orange, right? What's happening? Maybe like real indigestion, maybe you're like, you know, bouncing up and down, your legs up, bouncing up and down, you're not sleeping at night, maybe there's a little bit of insomnia, maybe that's some orange flag, right? And then of course you've got red flag, danger, right? That's probably going to be your chest pain, your palpitations and things like that. So that's an exercise that actually you can engage in and help yourselves to say, okay, when I engage in these behaviors, these represent green flag stuff, right? Whatever that may be for yourself. I'm able to listen to music, I'm able to turn in my work on time, all of those things, right? Green flag. And then kind of say, okay, what happens when I start to feel a little stressed out? Yellow flag, orange flag, and then let's look at the red flag. What you want to do is be, for the most part, between the green and yellow flags. And why I say is that a little bit of stress is actually good for us, right? It motivates us, it keeps us going, it keeps us focused on the next goal that we need to achieve, it gets us to places that we need to go. If life is all just green flags and everything's peachy keen, hunky-dory all the time, it's going to get boring after a while. I know you probably feel like you would love to have a bunch of green flag days, and that's normal, but for the most part, as human beings, we've got that cognitive structure that says we need to be challenged a little bit. And those yellow flags help us do that, gets a little bit of that juice going. Orange starts to signal, hey, you're a little off course here. We need to kind of get back over here. So the idea being that as soon as you start to see orange flag behaviors, you pull back and you don't ever get to the red flag where you're completely out of sorts. All right? Again, those are just some of those things that you're talking about in terms of what does stress actually look like. Again, we talk about frequent illnesses and pre-existing illnesses, right? So again, that talks about that mind-body connection that says what we are thinking and feeling has a direct impact on what our body ends up experiencing. And to the point where we actually can create illness physically. All right, stress in terms of mental symptoms. What does it look like? Decreased concentration, attention, forgetfulness, mind draws a blank, we're not able to think straight, it doesn't feel right. What are our emotional symptoms? Tension, anxiety, nervousness, depression, sadness, fear, worry. These are all the symptoms that we're going to feel when we are anxious from an emotional standpoint. Behaviorally, this is what you might see behaviorally happening, right? So if you're starting to see some of these things, this might go into your yellow flag or green flag notion. Is, hey, I am biting my fingers a lot, or I am ignoring my chores, or I do tend to just fall apart and start crying at the drop of a hat, and I don't understand why that's happening. That might be a signal that says that you're experiencing some things that needs to be handled, needs to get some control under. All right, so again, we're talking about that mind-body connection. It's not so much what happens to you that matters, but how you take it. Remember we talked about, it's that perception of what's happening in the world. When we are able to interpret that event in a very different way, we are able to control what our response is going to be versus simply reacting to that event. If the stress if the event was the cause of the stress, then everyone that experienced that event would also experience stress, right? So it's not the event. For example, right, we've all taken flights. How many times have our flights been delayed? If a delayed flight actually caused stress, then everybody in the airport would be fully stressed out. There are plenty of people that say, all right, whatever, I'm just gonna go get another drink at the bar, right? And doesn't faze them, right? Obviously there are some exceptions to the rule. 9/11 was one of those events that caused stress across the globe for pretty much everybody that was witness to it. There's a stress pathway, right? And we all know this, we all understand this. Events are understood not just by seeing them, they're understood through all 5 of our senses. We see, touch, feel, taste, smell, all of those things give meaning to what we are experiencing and how we are going to experience them. The stress pathway is directly linked, right? You guys have probably taken some biology to our sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems that are in a very sort of segment of the brain that really has very little logic, has very little ability to have cognitive higher power, higher order thinking, is reactive, is that reactive component, right? Fight or flight, right? How many of you have heard that phrase, fight or flight, right? So it triggers that sense of, okay, I am ready, bring it on, or heck no, I'm out of here. I'm running the other direction, right? It is a response set that is a reaction. It is a instinct. It's an instinctive reaction based on our interpretation of the events. We see something, we interpret it, sends a message to our limbic system that says, get ready, because something bad's about to go down, right? And our body then has to start to react. What happens to our body? Well, it sends in all kinds of epinephrine and all this other stuff. It slows down digestion. It dilates our eyes. It speeds up our breathing, speeds up our pulse. Why? Because we're getting ready to either fight the situation or run like hell, right? And in all of those things, we need all the energy that we can possibly muster. Well, unfortunately, what happens in today's world is we're not running from dinosaurs like primitive caveman was, right? Because remember, that part of the brain really hasn't evolved a whole lot more than when we were back in those days. So when that dinosaur showed up, that caveman needed to figure out, okay, can I take this guy or am I running the other direction? That part of the brain is still pretty much what's triggering for us. I know I'm simplifying it a lot, but that part of the brain is still what's triggering for us when we experience anxiety. So when that part of the brain says, be afraid and get ready to fight, it's going to do whatever it has to do. Unfortunately, in today's world, our stress isn't about having to fight that dinosaur. It's about trying to figure out, is our project going to be done on time? And is our application going to be done on time? And am I going to pass the test? And am I going to get my GPA correct so that I can keep my scholarship? Right? All of these other things are what's causing that exact same reaction in our brain. What do you think the likelihood is going to be that our bodies are going to be able to sustain that for very long? Right? Not so good. Not so good. We cannot sustain being exposed to that level of chemicals within our body that sets us up to fight or run for a very long period of time. And we are chronically stressed in this country. Right? We are chronically stressed. And until we convince our mind, I have the word convince here in quotes, because remember, we're not logical, right? Until we convince our mind that by changing the sensory input, that pathway will continue to fire. Right? And so we'll come back to that in a second about what that looks like. All right. Coping with stress. One of the things that we all talked about, or we all know about, is that you have to have a certain amount of arousal, stress in this vocabulary, to be able to have a certain amount of performance, right? Now, if you see this is a bell curve. What happens is when our stress level is too low and we're not really motivated to do anything, guess what? Our performance isn't that great either. Our performance isn't that great either. But as some of that stress or arousal goes up, what happens? Our performance starts to go up. To a certain point. And then what happens is that once we get past that certain optimal level of arousal, our performance actually starts to go down the other direction. But we are convinced that, okay, my performance is going down, so what do I have to do? I have to buckle down even further. I have to just bear down even harder and go at it even stronger so that I can make up for that performance. Right? What in fact we need to do is decrease our sense of arousal. Decrease that sense of what we're feeling and experiencing so that we can come back onto this side of the bell curve. And then what happens? We can ratchet back up again to the top of that bell curve. Right? So that's the strategy that you want to kind of start looking at implementing for yourselves as you deal with this, is to say, am I on this side of the bell curve? Is my productivity gone down? Have I been sitting at the library for the last 6 hours and reading the same paragraph and nothing's really changing, right? Nothing's really getting in, right? That means that you're on this side of that stress arousal and your productivity is down here somewhere, right? You are just not going to get anywhere good. What needs to happen? You need to get back onto this side of that bell curve. All right? Anyone have any questions on this notion? All right. So what are some of the strategies for for controlling some of this? Setting limits. Yeah. We talked about being overscheduled. Right? Being able to say no. Right? There's a thing I'm going to forget now. It's called delete, defer, delegate, and there's another D. It's called the 4 Ds. Delete emails that come at us. Defer something to a later point. Delegate it off. Right? We have to be able to figure out and set limits and say no sometimes. That's the best way. It's a good way. I can't say best way. Proper rest, nutrition, exercise. How many of you exercise when you feel like you're not getting anywhere good studying? Yes? Excellent. Okay? What happens when you exercise is you are forcing those good chemicals, those endorphins, to come in, wipe out the toxic chemicals that have been released into your body, and allows those muscles to kind of go, oh, okay, fine, I give. I'm gonna get all that good stuff coming in, and it gives your brain exposure to chemicals that are actually healthy for you to be able to come back into that productive side of the bell curve, right? Avoiding burnout, working smarter, not harder, is probably a phrase that you all have heard, right? Work smarter, not harder. What does that mean? It means possibly taking a break every hour and a half for 15 minutes. Right? My daughter is a senior at college, and I've had that conversation with her, and she says, no, I cannot take a break right now. I need to just stick with this. And I've tried to explain to her that no, taking a break will actually improve your ability to figure out what you're not getting right now. Right? Making time for leisure feels guilty. You feel guilty for saying, all right, I'm going to go out and have fun for 15 minutes. You feel guilty because there are so many other people around you that are just into their books and locked away in the corner of a library somewhere. And it doesn't feel right. It feels like you're breaking with tradition of how you're supposed to do this, right? Scheduling that leisure activity can actually do so much more to help you with that next boost that you need to get to that next peak on that productivity. And one of the things that I meant to do with this, with that bell curve, is to help you see that life is actually jumping from one bell curve onto the next. That's how progress is made, right? You go to a bell curve, and if you just stay, you're either going to plateau or you're going to come down. The idea being that you jump to the next one, and then you ride that bell curve up to the next. And then when you put those points together, guess what? Your productivity is going like this, at an upward angle, right? So bell curve over to the next bell curve, over to the next bell curve. That's how you get productivity going. It's not about just jumping back to the same bell curve and just doing the same thing again. So from a visual standpoint, I want to make sure that you guys see that. Okay. The most prioritizing time and your tasks. This is a concept that was really brought to light by Dwight Eisenhower. And he says the most urgent decisions are rarely the most important ones, right? So years ago, he created what's called the Eisenhower Matrix. Richard Covey, how many of you have ever heard of the book, oh gosh, I forgot it, How Highly Successful People. 7 Habits, thank you, yeah. So he was the one that really popularized this concept, right? So you break down life into 4 quadrants. You've got your important but not urgent, quadrant 1. Important and urgent, quadrant 2. Not important, not urgent, quadrant 3. Not important but urgent, quadrant 4. Right? Well, what does that look like? Well, not urgent but important are things like exercising, studying, taking family time. A majority of your tasks and activities should be spent in this quadrant. Right? It's important stuff. It's not urgent. It's important. The idea being that in box 2, which are things like deadlines and crises and problems that require immediate attention, ideally these tasks should be proactively eliminated over here before they even get into the, oh my God, this is important and now it's urgent, right? We do it before it becomes urgent so that we don't create that sense of, okay, now I'm starting to see the orange flags and red flags coming at me, right? What's not important, not urgent? Well, time-wasting activities. How many of us sit around and surf the net and watch ridiculous videos on YouTube and, you know, TikTok and everything else, right? Social media, gaming. Yes, it's important. It's part of that leisure activity, but it also can be something that we end up wasting a lot of time in, depending on if we are or are not controlling how much time we put into that. And then not important, but urgent. These are like those text message interruptions that I need to know right now, are you coming to this party this weekend so I can, you know, and it's an interruption. It gets in your way, it takes you away from what you need to be focused on, right? Being able to tell the difference between something that's not important but urgent and important and urgent becomes a fine line. So it depends on you and being able to kind of define those two things. So it becomes very easy to confuse. The problem with this box is it actually feels like we're getting somewhere, because we'll be able to check things off. Oh yeah, I answered that text and I took care of this email and I did this. And so you feel like you've done a lot of good things that are productive, but you're not really getting real productivity in. All right, so some of the other things that we talked about briefly too is, you know, communication skills, listening, right? Listening, believe it or not, is a lot of good communication. It's the majority of good communication, is being able to listen well. But at the same time, avoiding communication overload. Never being out of touch means never being able to get away either. Right? So we are a completely in touch society. cell phones, computers, everything. We are constantly connected with one another, and that can feel very overwhelming. How many of you have ever taken cell phone breaks and just said, it's down and it's good? How did it feel? Yeah? For those that didn't, have you ever thought of trying? Yes? You should give it a try, even if it's for an hour, right? Put your phone down and go for a walk for an hour. And for 1 hour, see what it feels like to actually not look on a notification, or not be pinged, or not be buzzed, or not wonder, oh, what's happening on this side or that side or this place. Just let yourself be for a moment and see what that feels like. It doesn't have to be a day or 2 days or 3 days. It can be an hour. To let it go and then reflect back upon yourself in terms of what that person feels like. All right, watch your belief systems, your musts, your have-tos, your I can'ts. Those all serve to trip you up. I must get all A's. I can't do poorly in school. Right? It becomes so rigid that it becomes another source of your stress. Expectations, a belief that something will happen in the future, but an unforeseen circumstance actually gets in the way. So you have to kind of change your approach from what you don't want to do to what you do want to do. Again, this is cognitive reframing, right? Kind of tricking your mind into believing what you want to do. Instead of saying, I don't want to fail my test, you say, I want to study well for my test. Right? It sounds like word salad, but it's meant to help keep your brain from triggering that limbic system that says something's wrong and you're in trouble, right? We're trying to create a place where you guys don't feel that stress and that are not going to experience it. Now, some of the myths that are out there is that stress is the same for everyone. Do you think stress is the same for everyone? No, right? Everyone experiences it very differently. Everyone has different thresholds for what they're going to experience, and they completely react in completely different ways as well. Stress is bad. How many of you think stress in and of itself is bad? Right? Based on what I talked about, we actually realize stress at some levels is actually good for us. Stress is everywhere, so you have to live with it. Why is that a fallacy? Because you can actually shape your life in different ways so that you can create stress-free moments in your day, stress-free places and times in your day, and how you think and how you feel. The most popular strategies are the most effective ones. True? No. The best ones are the ones that fit your own individual needs. And the best ones are actually the ones in which you maintain healthy support systems, right? When you can reach out to your friends, your family, your counselors, your leadership team that's here. Your team around you is the best way, one of the best ways to help deal with stress. No symptoms? That means no stress, right? True? No, not true at all. Why? Because over time, even though you might be really good at dealing with stress, remember what I said, we're dealing with stress. Our brain says something's wrong. It's flooding your body with all these chemicals and all these other signals. And you're just dealing with it. You're tolerating it. Yes, you're not falling apart. But guess what? Long-term chronic exposure to all of that will eventually lead to disease states that we have yet to fully understand are actually caused by stress. We know tobacco causes lung cancer, right? But what do we know what stress causes? We don't really know yet, but we do know that it does have that direct effect on it. And only major symptoms require attention? No, that's not true either. Minor symptoms will eventually turn into major ones, which is, again, going back to that notion of yellow flags, orange flags, red flags. Yellow flags represent those minor symptoms, right? Catch them before they turn into orange, and you're diverted onto a path, and you're getting way off the grid, right? When you're starting to go there, you've got to start paying attention. So minor symptoms are not meant to be ignored. They're meant to have an impact on your brain to say, hey, wake up, pay attention, something's happening, right? So those are just some of the myths that are out there. I know I blew through a lot of information. Folks have to get back to class and stuff, I know, but I want to take a few minutes and turn it back over to you guys and just ask some questions, whatever they may be.
I have a question that a lot of our students ask me. They'll come see one of us and wonder about their kind of long-term goals, their majors, careers, things like that. A lot of times they have pressures from their family to do one thing or another, whether it be a doctor, engineer, whatever, and they don't really want to do that. And so how would you approach that situation?
So communication is the hardest thing, right? Being able to just say what you need to say, right? Coming from a place that says, of all the people in the world, who has the most vested in seeing you succeed? Who do you think those are? Outside of yourself? Parents, loved ones, family, right? So the hardest plunge is that first statement that you have to make to say, Mom and Dad, I want to do this, or I don't want to do this. And I'll say that this is a conversation that's actually happened in my home, my family, personally, and to myself, and I've had to deal with it with my daughter. When I was a kid growing up as an Indian, there was pretty much no other career for me other than being a medical doctor. Pretty much medicine is what was expected of me to do. Somewhere in high school-ish, I said, I really love mental health. I feel like it just connects to me. So I had to have that conversation. Oh my goodness, you would have thought I told my parents I was joining the circus, because they, as far as I was concerned, was going to be, a lost cause that's not going to get anywhere. And I had to deal with that disappointment of what they were dealing with and the struggle. But one thing that I had to learn and was taught was to keep that line of communication open. Listen. Remember I said, so half of communicating is listening. Listen to what your parents have to say. When your parents say, but I don't understand why you would want to do this, where are they coming from? Where do you think they're coming from? Is it a place of they know better, or do you think they're coming from a place of, I'm fearful that everything's not going to work out exactly the way I thought it was going to work out, right? They see your life in a certain path. Who's going to see your life the best? Them or you? You, right? You're going to see your life the most effective way. They're going to see it through your eyes. They're going to see it through your eyes. So when they say, why would you do this? Why are you doing this? Recognize internally, they're coming from a place of fear, uncertainty, concern that maybe you're going to struggle. Who wants their child to struggle? Right? If your parents could take your struggle for you, wouldn't they? Right? I know I would. Right? Nobody wants to see their child struggle. So when hard conversations have to be there, recognize for a moment from your parents' standpoint that it is from a place of them wanting to not struggle for you. Them wanting you to not struggle, right? Them wanting you to have the clearest path that they think is there for you. But you see things a little clearer. So it's going to be about listening to what they have to say and being able to sort of get them to listen and say, okay, Dad, Mom, I heard you. I hear that you're afraid. I hear that you're concerned. And right off the bat, when you recognize that someone is afraid or concerned, if someone were to talk to you and you were able to say to them, you know what, it sounds like you're really afraid. Doesn't that like automatically just kind of go, oh wow, they got me, they heard me, right? Right? It makes you just feel like things are going to be okay. Same happens in the same situation works with your parents. Being able to say to them, I heard you. I hear that you're scared. I hear that you're concerned. I hear that you're not certain about what's going to happen. But I've got a great team at the Honors College that's going to help me figure out where things are going to go. And I'm a freshman, and so I've got years in front of me to figure this out. Right? Or I'm a senior and I've got the internship crew guiding me and counseling me and figuring where things go. And I'd love to have you, even maybe we can go and meet them. I don't know if it's possible, but those kinds of things can help big time in terms of being able to calm your parents down. But recognizing ultimately they just simply come from a place of fear and concern because they don't want to see your child struggle. Does that answer some of it?
That's great, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Thoughts? Comments? No?
Very thorough with the causation of stress, I think. I like that. You're definitely covered like all your bases.
There's a lot of places and ways that it comes at you. And I threw all of them at you so that you could start to pay attention to what is actually happening around you, right? And recognizing that each of these things has an impact on you. It could be small to it could be large. Even recognizing the little ones and being able to pay attention to that is really important. And I mentioned, a couple times that when that alarm system goes off, simply talking your way through it isn't going to work. It's not going to work. You've got to physically deactivate that space, right? So deep breathing. How many of you actually have ever done a true abdominal deep breathing exercise? Yes? Yes? You want to do that with me real quick? You guys have 2 minutes? All right, take a deep breath. We're going to just sit up on your sit bones with your back straight, hands on your lap just to relax for a minute. All right, I'm going to walk you through this. You're going to take a deep breath in with your eyes closed. You're going to take a deep breath in through your nose. All right, and I'm going to count it out for you, and then I'm going to ask you to pause that deep breath. Just pause it. Let that sink into your lungs and deep, right? When you pause that deep breath, I want you to feel your belly expand, like there's a balloon there. And I want you to imagine your lungs dropping down into your belly, right? And just allow that air to sink. And then when I say, okay, exhale, I want you to exhale through your mouth, but slowly, like you're trying to whistle. And I want you to have that cycle of that breath in and that breath out to be the exact same, right? So I'm going to count you through. Take a deep breath in, this is a practice one. Close your eyes and relax, breathe out, and I'm going to count you in. Take a deep breath in on the count. 1, 2, 3, pause. And blow out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next one, I want to hear those exhales. Take a deep breath in. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold and exhale. 4, 5. And last one, in deep. And drop those shoulders and exhale out. Open your eyes and come back to the center. How did that feel? Can anyone tell me could you almost instantly feel a sense of relaxation that came through? Look, I see you yawning, right? These kinds of quick deep breath exercise just goes to show you what happens is that our brains are often oxygen deprived because we're shallow breathing. We're shallow breathing. And our brain is just like going, okay, I need energy, I need air. And so our heart's pumping to try and get as much of that oxygen as possible. Taking that deep breath in slows down our heart, slows down the breathing, gets plenty of oxygen back to the brain, and guess what? Now we're able to fire again, right? So that's the way you turn off that alarm system that's going off in your brain. Talking your way through it isn't going to be enough. You've got to turn that down, and then you start to apply some of that behavioral stuff. All right. Thanks, folks, for listening to me. I appreciate you guys.